Hello, everyone. Today's date is November 26, 2023. We are having a Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation. We are proposing the creation of a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine, a federal government that would make peace between the people of Israel and Palestine. We are not proposing the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are proposing a separate and independent government based on democracy, fairness, equality, with all the people in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. You could read our constitution at ipconfederation.org, and you can send me an email to josephavassar@gmail.com. Today we have Mitchel Plitnick as our speaker. Mr. Plitnick is currently the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy. He is a political analyst and a writer who co-authored the book, Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics, with Mark Lamont Hill. The book was published in February of 2021 by the New Press. Before his current role, Mitchell held positions such as Vice President of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, Director of the U.S. Office of B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, and was the co-director of Jewish Voice for Peace. His writings have been featured in various publications, including Haaretz, The New Republic, Mondawise, Responsible Statecraft, The New Arab Middle East Report, Law Blog, the San Francisco Chronicle, Plus 972 magazine, Outlook, and others. He has also been invited to speak on Middle East politics across the country and has provided commentary on numerous radio and television platforms such as PBS NewsHour, Tom O'Reilly Factor, I-24 Israel, Pacifica Radio, CNBC Asia, and more. Mitchell graduated with honors from UC Berkeley, where he majored in Middle Eastern Studies and wrote his thesis on Israeli and Jewish historiography. He further pursued his education at the University of Maryland College Park School of Public Policy, where he obtained his master's degree. We have invited many people, and many people have participated in our simulations, and many have shown and participated. A list is in front of you. Noam Chomsky was in our simulation twice, and he endorsed the IPC formula for peace and recorded a video endorsing it. Colonel West, who is now running for president, also supported the IPC formula. Not everyone that you see here supported, but I would say most of the people that you see on this list had very good things to say about our formula for peace. We also invited people that unfortunately have not agreed to come or did not respond to us. We are making constant efforts to bring them on, and we have more and more people that are accepting our invitations to join in the simulations. Many of them are just not clear about what we do, and so that's why we are conducting a simulation to clarify what it is that we do. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Ruth Gold. She's a professor of politics, and she'll be on December 10. We will have a two-state solution simulation so that it is clear we are not really proposing anything substantive, including a two-state. I am personally do not believe in a two-state, but if we have a common federal government, that common government could create two-state if the parliament decides to do so. And on December 17, we will present three options for two states, and hopefully you will join and have an opportunity to vote on one of those or several of those formulas for two states. On January 7, we will have Professor Omar Bartov. He is a professor at Brown University. He teaches Holocaust and genocide studies, and he accepted our invitation and will be with us on January 7. And on January 21st, we will have Hillel Schenker, who is the co-editor of Palestine-Israel Journal, which is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian publication for many years. The simulation today will take approximately 120 minutes, including all the segments and including the question and answer to Mitchel Plitnick. The first hour or so will be the simulation itself, and then we will be closing with a 5 minutes closing remarks. I'd like to show you a video that explains in two and a half minutes our formula for peace.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So before we start the simulation, I would like to conduct a pre-simulation survey and all of you to vote at this time. Do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel in the West Bank and Gaza to make peace, which will coexist with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments? Please vote on this survey question, and we will conduct a similar, identical survey at the end of the simulation. So I'm going to give it 30 more seconds for people to vote. Okay. 5 more seconds. All right, can you please publish the vote? 25 out of 31, which is 81%, voted yes. 6 out of 31, which is 19%, voted no. I'm hoping that at the end of the simulation, we will increase the yes vote. And I just wanted to tell Mitchell that the reason we have such a high yes vote at this time is because most of the people that are participating today, or many of the people that have participated in a previous simulation, and they understand what it is. I just would like to make a comment at this time that if we had a common federal government in 1947, before the creation of the state of Israel, we would not have had the expulsion of the Palestinian refugees. We probably would not have had the War of Independence or the Nakba, and so on and so on. But if we had the common federal government just a year ago, if it was created a year ago, we probably would have had many Palestinian parliament members in Gaza and in southern Israel, all of Israel. We would have had a common federal government that advocates for the people of Palestine and Israel in an equal way, and would have looked and stood up to the Palestinian, Hamas, and the Israeli government, who showed their failure in their ability to give peace to the people of Israel and Palestine. A common federal government would have been a government that would advocate for the Palestinian and Israeli people that are now being displaced and have become refugees in their own land. So if a common federal government would probably have avoided or eliminated what Israel and Gaza is going through right now. Our objective is to show how a common government would make peace. We are not supporting the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. We believe that a common government will have its own narrative. Mr. Plitnick was not invited to be a spokesperson for the IPC. He was invited to stress test the IPC, to tell us if there is anything wrong with our formula for peace. We are pro-peace. We do not follow the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative. We believe that when a common government will be created, and we are simulating as if it was created, it would have its own narrative. The narrative that is the best for the people of Israel and Palestine, not the Israeli people alone or the Palestinian people alone, but all the people of Israel and Palestine. We expect to have a rigorous discussion, but we will respect each other and be very sincere in our discussion, but we will respect each other. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. All other formulas are invited and should be explored. We're not claiming exclusivity. We think that other formulas should have a fair evaluation, just like as we're asking for ourselves. We will ask Mr. Plitnick, and we will ask all of you to judge our plan based on fairness, not based on perfection. Perfection is an impossibility. We cannot reach perfection, but we will ask Mr. Plitnick and all of you, do you have a better alternative? If so, what is the alternative? If you do not have a better alternative, then you should say so. Just criticizing our formula by itself because it's not perfect is not fair. We are trying to show how a common federal government could make peace by passing legislation that would be acceptable to both sides. More precisely, that both sides would not be able to reject. There are many, many legislation that we can show. This, what we are showing today, is the tip of the iceberg, but we are asking you to look at the big picture, avoid technical arguments, and refrain from comments. The only person that is allowed to make comments and ask questions is Mr. Plitnick. I'm asking you to ask questions only during the simulation. This is not a lecture. This is a simulation. And if you need clarifications, that's fine. Please, we encourage you to ask questions, but keep your comments to the end. A simulation is a model that mimics the operation of an existing or proposed system, and that's what we are conducting today. Mr. Plitnick can make comments and ask questions at the same time. So if I show you an airplane and you say, how does this plane fly? That's a question. But if you say airplanes cause pollution, that's a comment. That's the difference. We ask you to ask questions, but you can write your comments on the chat and keep them to the end when we have an open discussion with Mr. Plitnick. This is a simulation. We are asking you to make these assumptions. You know, governments make assumptions, corporations make assumptions, militaries make assumptions. Everything that large entities do, and some of us in person, we make assumptions. These are the assumptions that I'm asking you to make for the purpose of conducting this simulation. The first assumption is that we allowed all of the people in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, 14 million people, to vote, obviously excluding minors. We also want you to assume that 5 million people voted, that 3 million Palestinians voted, and 2 million Israelis voted. Even under the existing circumstances, we want you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. I would like you to assume that I was elected as president. The reason I'm asking you to assume that I, Joseph, was elected as president is because it makes it easier for me to conduct the simulation. I do not intend to ever run for president, and in fact, under the Constitution, I'm not qualified to be as president, but I'm asking you to assume that I was elected as president, and a Palestinian lady with 1.3 million votes was elected as vice president, and we will rotate in 2 years. I also want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected, Palestinians and Israelis in 300 districts. Each parliament member represents his or her district only. The parliament members are elected by the districts, not by the entire nation of Israel or Palestine. They are elected specifically in 300 parliamentary districts, and they have responsibility towards their district because they are elected by their district, and their district consists of 47,000 people. So my first question to you and to Mitchel Plitnick is, do you have any questions about the assumptions?
No, I think the assumptions are pretty clear to me.
Okay, do you have any questions?
No, we're fine.
Are you willing to accept those assumptions for the purpose of the simulations?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think that it is realistic to achieve those assumptions if we have the ability to spend $100 million, which is, by the way, how much Israel and Palestine, Gaza war on a low scale for 1 day? Do you think we can? Do you think we can make those assumptions a reality?
I think that, yeah, I think it's and it's reflected in the number of people voting being a little bit low. I think it's a conservative estimate, which is good, and so I think that that makes it achievable. Yeah.
So you actually think that the number of voters will be higher?
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be higher. I think if this if a confederation idea came across in the right way and was presented to people who are really looking for an alternative with enough time to discuss it. And I think it's important that you talk about a 3-month period that would build this up. So enough time for there to be some public debates and discussions and clarifications. I think there's a reasonable hope that you could actually get more people, particularly because this format does not eliminate the existing governmental structures. So they would see, people would be able to see it as adding something, as opposed to, you know, taking away what they have and feeling like there may be something that is constraining them. So I think that's a positive. Now that's in general, that's a general assumption that I'm making. It actually is maybe a little optimistic under the current, in the current moment. But you know, I think I'm thinking of it in terms of you know, what's quote unquote normal in Israel Palestine, not this moment, which is a little more obviously you know, the emotions are obviously turned up quite a bit.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? People in the audience, do you have any questions regarding those assumptions? Do you need clarifications about those assumptions? All right, hearing no questions.
Well, we go through a period now when many people are going to be dying in the next couple of months. So I don't know that this is a very effective time to take an election.
Okay. Do you, Richard, do you have a question? Richard?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm speaking from the Wales, from the United Nations Association branch. Yeah, is not part of the assumption here that there is a Palestinian state in existence?
Correct. There is no, that's not part of the assumption.
That's not part of the assumption.
No,
Oh.
It's not part of the assumption that there is an Israeli or a Palestinian state in existence.
Well, there is an Israeli state in existence, but you're assuming with this, there is no creation of a formal state of
Okay.
state. Okay.
Richard, so that you understand our perspective,
Yeah.
the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are, from our perspective, are obstacles to peace. They are not, and we do not propose to stand on their shoulders. We are an independent and separate government, and we are conducting the election based on the current reality, and regardless of whether there is an Israeli or a Palestinian government, in now or in the future.
Okay.
Any other question?
Joseph, is it possible to have one state with a confederation of the two people and have the districts at the local level have their own local governments, but have a central government, which is the confederation, instead of having two different governments, because there is segregation with the existence of two governments?
Everything is theoretically possible. This is what we are proposing: a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine, regardless of the existence or non-existence of the Israeli or the Palestinian government.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Okay. So we will ask you, the audience, to act as parliament members in the simulation. You will have to choose whether you are an Israeli parliament member or a Palestinian parliament member. you remember that you'll have to remember that some of the districts or many of the districts may be mixed districts, meaning Palestinians and Israelis live together. And if you're Israeli, you could be elected by a district that is mostly Palestinian, or the other way around. A Palestinian could vote for Israeli, or Israeli could vote for a Palestinian. The same for president and vice president. So I will ask you at this time to choose, and I'll show you a map. Please choose your district. And I will ask, first of all, the Palestinians to vote, to identify yourself as Palestinian parliament members. So please vote. Yes, you need to vote yes if you are Palestinian parliament members in order for us to know how many Palestinian parliament members we have in this simulation. Give it 30 more seconds. Okay, 5 more seconds. Please publish the votes. We have 17 Palestinian parliament members. And let's go now to Israeli. We'll see how many Israeli parliament members. And I may ask you, what is your district? In other words, what city do you represent? Okay, 30 more seconds. Now I will ask you to remain who you are. In other words, you cannot be both Palestinians and Israeli parliament member. You can only be Israeli or Palestinian, and I ask you to be intellectually honest and think in terms of the representation of your district when you vote. Okay, publish the vote. We have 16 Israeli parliament members and 17 Palestinian parliament members. Now I will also ask, I need a volunteer to be Israeli Prime Minister. Is anyone willing to be the Israeli, someone new that hasn't been before, Israeli Prime Minister, someone to act as Israeli Prime Minister in this simulation? Do I have a volunteer of someone who is willing to be the Israeli Prime Minister in this simulation? Please. And then I need a Palestinian president. Is Karen, are you the Israeli or Palestinian? Karen?
I am alter Israeli.
I'm sorry?
Alter Israeli.
Israeli, okay. So Karen, you are the Israeli Prime Minister. And do we have a Palestinian president?
I will then.
Todd?
Yes.
Okay, Todd, you are the Palestinian president. All right. You will be given a veto power. You cannot vote as parliament member. You can only vote as the Prime Minister of Israel for Karen, and Todd as the president of Palestine, but you cannot vote as parliament member. Since I didn't see any objection from Mitchel to the assumptions, I'm not going to respond to his non-objections, but these are generally what we respond to when people object to the idea of having an election for a federal common government. The first order of business is for us to pass a constitution. Do I have, Charles, are you here? Do I have a volunteer to read?
Yeah, sure, I'll read it.
Okay, please.
The poll is covering it. Let's see. Okay. Constitution. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right, so the important part is that we do not intend to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. We do not intend to undermine any agreements between them. They can agree on two-state solution, one state, or any other combination of solution. Constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining any agreements between the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. We also give them a veto power over legislation we pass if the legislation contradict or impinges on their sovereignty. So if we pass legislation that violates the sovereignty of the government of Israel or the Palestinian government, they're given a veto power over that legislation. If they veto the legislation does not pass. But if they do not veto the legislation, it becomes the law of the land, meaning for the whole area of Israel, Palestine. Does anyone have any questions? Before I go to Mitchell, do you have any questions regarding the Constitution? Please speak up.
Yes, I think
Okay, what is your question?
I think we should take out the clause saying
What is your question?
my question is that all legislation affects them. Both the Palestinians and the Israelis should have a veto on every bit of legislation.
Okay, so that's a comment. That's your suggestion. So you're asking why is it that they don't have a veto on everything? Is that your question?
Yes,
Okay, the answer is we are a separate and independent government. We have many things that we do not need to give a veto because we can conduct our business on many issues regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government object. And we are the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine. So we do not have to give a veto if it's not necessary. Any other question?
Just for the record, how will we trust the Israeli right wing if they should get into office, given how much they've done to subvert the judicial process in existing Israel?
In order to be a parliament member, you have to give up your loyalty to any other government, and you have to accept the Constitution and swear allegiance to the common federal government publicly. Any other questions? Richard?
Yes, it's a bit of an awkward question, this. Creation of a permanent secular government. To me, that seems inherently at odds with what Israel seems to be at the moment, which is a neo-Zionist state. We may have to just assume it
Correct.
isn't.
Yeah, that's a comment. That's not a question. The
Well,
question,
the question is isn't it? Isn't it at odd? Isn't the question is it not at odds with what exists at the moment inherently?
and the answer, yes, it is. It
Right.
is.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Giacomo?
My question concerned also the secular government. So would the IPC Parliament would pass such a statement without without subjecting it to any national veto? If that's my understanding at this point.
It gives a veto to the Israeli and the Palestinian government.
And
only
I'm talking
on
about the
issues-
secular. Yeah, I'm talking about the clause
Constitution.
about believing in a secular government.
The
is
Israeli and the
something that-
Palestinian governments do not have a veto power over the Constitution.
That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I saw someone else raise his hand before, but I guess, okay, let's go to Mitchell. Mitchell, do you have any comments or questions regarding the Constitution?
One thing that I wonder if well, that is obviously not in the Constitution, and I wonder how you're thinking about it, because it has the potential to be very disruptive, is the question of Jerusalem, and the issue of does the Confederation just simply go, leave as is the status quo, particularly in the old city, with the responsibility that's given to now another foreign government, which is Jordan, that is very deeply involved in administering the Temple Mount, of course, and the independence of the Waqf that actually does the work on the ground. This is obviously a point of contention right now between Israelis and Palestinians. Is the idea here that we leave it that way? That's sort of one of the things, that this is a forum to create that would address that. Or are we just ignoring it? Or is there some other, bottom line is it has the potential, Jerusalem always has the potential to blow things up, because that's just the nature of the conflict there.
Right. There are many, many issues: Jerusalem, refugees, the right of return, the settlements. All of these issues are not addressed specifically in the Constitution. We are proposing that the parliament members, with 300 parliament members, will resolve those issues based on 55% of the Israeli and 55% of the Palestinian parliament members voting on these issues, and then giving a veto power on these issues that you mentioned to the Israeli and the Palestinian government. So the idea is that we will be required to pass legislation that would be acceptable to both sides, or that neither side could reject. But we do not, in the Constitution, we do not discuss any substantive issue.
So my other question regards the judicial branch, which is I think, by the nature of this Constitution and the nature of the structure that this Confederation would build, the judicial branch is comparatively, at least from the perspective of someone in like the United States, the judicial branch is relatively weak, just because it's it's not, as far as I can see, being tasked with supporting, making these kinds of constitutional questions. It's tasked with supporting the existing laws and being a place to adjudicate the laws that are passed, which is fine. My question then is, it seems like there will inevitably be an expectation when there are judicial issues within the districts, within Israel, within Palestine, that there will be some appeal there, or that when the Confederation is making judgments, does it have to in any way take into account, depending on the case before it, the existing Israeli or Palestinian law? It seems like that's a tangle, and that could get confusing as things go on to me.
Well, the law of Israel and the Palestinian law is supreme. The common government, once it passes law, the Supreme Court of the common government is restricted to the laws of that the common government passed, the federal government passed. Now, according to the Constitution, in order for a Palestinian to be convicted, there has to be majority judges, Palestinians. In order to Israeli to be convicted, there has to be majority judges, Israelis. And both of them will have an appeal right to to their respective government's judicial district. The judicial system. So if an Israeli gets convicted, then they have the ability to appeal to the Israeli court system. If a Palestinian gets convicted, they can have the right to go to the Palestinian court system, who have the right to accept or reject their appeal.
So my last other question is, how does this the Constitution doesn't seem to address the question of international or foreign relations. So what I'm left to assume is that Israel and Palestine individually, in some way, continue to represent their separate peoples in international forum, for example, the United Nations. So the Confederation, which is vowing not to in any way supersede or undermine existing arrangements, would be committing, right, I gather, to not in any way thwarting Israel's membership in the UN, Palestine's membership as a at the moment at least as a non-observer as an observer state in the UN, and would not be seeking to become a recognized member of the United Nations on its own. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
You are reading the first two right, that it does not seek to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinians' UN status, but we are free to require or request the UN to recognize us as the illegitimate government.
Doesn't that, I mean, if you have, so that, I mean, that would be unique in the United Nations, where a sort of confederation or a federal type government is a member of the UN, and also the subsidiaries or the parts, if you want, not subsidiaries. I know that's not how you think of it. The parts of that federal government would also be members. That would be a unique situation. I'm not sure it would be one that would be acceptable in the UN. And it also, it seems to me, invites certain, I mean, that's kind of an open forum where the Confederation would be an independent actor from either or both of Israel and Palestine. It seems like that could cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, but it's subject to a veto power by the Israeli and the Palestinian government.
So any international action that it took would still be subject to vetoes. So
only if it violates the sovereignty of the Israeli and the Palestinian government.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, then that means that any arrangement that the Confederation made with a third, let's say, with France, as long as it in no way impacts sovereignty of Israel, Palestine, then it can do that. If it does, either one of them can veto it.
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
Enough.
Any other questions? I see two participants. Please speak up. because I don't see your name. I only see two participants raise their hands. Please ask your question.
Okay, so my question is concerning the judicial. I was inspired. What happens if the IPC passes a law which is then approved and not vetoed by Israel or any Palestinian authority? What happens if there's a legal dispute concerning that legislation? Shouldn't the IPC have its own court of justice to decide matters pertaining to the legislation passed by the IPC Parliament?
Yeah, the IPC has its own legal system. The Israeli has their own legal system. The Palestinian have their own legal system, and they can override the common government system. They can
My
override
question-
a decision made by the judge by the Israeli-Palestinian common government judges.
And my question is, shouldn't that be enshrined in the Constitution? Add a
is.
line saying, oh, I see.
It is.
Okay.
So that you know that what you see here is a very short version of the Constitution. The real Constitution is on our website, and it's several pages long. This is just a short summary of it.
Thank you.
Okay, please speak up. I see people raising their hand, please.
So I
Just
just,
a
go ahead.
Sorry, just a quickie. Una, hi. First of all, good evening, everybody. And
Yeah, hi.
second, two caveats. Will the Palestinians who have been living abroad because they've been kicked out, will they be able to come back to that constitution, number one? And the settlers who've been going every day back to Israel, should they go back home, wherever they come from?
Like I said, all substantive issues will be resolved by the parliament. Whether, I thought you were going to ask me, would the Palestinian refugees be allowed to vote? And the answer is no, they're not allowed to vote. This is a common government created by the people of Israel and Palestine as an independent entity. It's not a Palestinian government. It's not an Israeli government. It's a government for the people of Israel and Palestine. As to substantive issues such as the right of return, the right to be expelled, or whether settlers could be expelled, all of these issues will be decided by the parliament. And if they violates the sovereignty of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, they have a veto power over it.
Thank you, Joseph.
Sure. Any other questions?
In the chat, I put in that as a Palestinian, I believe we would have to advocate that we agree to jurisdiction under the ICC and the Rome Statute. Maybe that's in the Constitution elsewhere, but not in the short piece. So how would we get that achieved? Because without that, we wouldn't have a necessary check upon the settlers and their routine war crimes.
Well, the only mechanism to have any decisions on each issue is the parliament. The parliament will have to find a mechanism to resolve all issues, including the settlers. And we have discussed those issues in legislation, such as creating a common police force. But the parliament will have the responsibility to deal with each and every issue. Those issues will not be decided by me or by us. It will have to be decided by the people who are elected to represent their districts. Any other questions? Okay, having no questions, let's vote. Palestinian parliament member. Now, since you are a parliament member now, when you vote, that means you have to accept the Constitution. If you do not accept the Constitution, you are expelled from the parliament, just like in any other democracy. So, Palestinian parliament members, please vote.
And just be clear, I don't get to vote as Palestinian representative.
You're not. and you don't have a veto power over this either.
Okay.
This is created whether or not you object to it or
Okay,
not. Okay, let's publish the vote. Of those Palestinian parliament members who voted, 100% voted yes. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members. Okay, publish the vote. 100%. So now we have a constitution, we have a parliament, we have a president, and this is a momentous event in the history of the Middle East. This is the first time a constitution was voted upon, accepted, and an election for the entire people of Israel and Palestine created a common government. This is a huge event in the history of humanity, from the beginning of humanity until now. So congratulations, congratulate all of you. Thank you. All right,
I have a question.
Yeah, let's go.
How can you have a constitution that does not get accepted by both the PA and Israel?
The Constitution is ratified by the people of Israel and Palestine, by the parliament, which was elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. All right, let's go to the next. So now we have a parliament, we have a constitution, and now we're passing our first order of business, which is granting a veto power to the separate governments. So we decide who to give a veto power to at this time. Charles, can you please read it?
Granting a veto power to the separate governments. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in these governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
All right. So basically, we are saying that we decide which government to give a veto power to, and we only give a veto power when it's necessary, when that government is indispensable to our policies. If it's not indispensable, we will not give it a veto power, and we can withdraw the veto power at any time if we can act without the consent or lack of consent of a specific government. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, yes. First of all, you have to take out the terminology.
What is your question, Len?
My question is that you cannot have the terminology from the river to the sea included in this because it's very specific meaning, and you can't have that in there. And
that's not a question, that's a comment. And so you're asking, why is it that we have why do we have the terminology from the river to the sea?
yes, the river to the sea.
Because we are the government of the entire area of Israel, Palestine, from the river to the sea. We gave the entire population from the river to the sea the option to vote. We have 300 districts from the river to the sea, and we received votes in each district. And I am the president of the whole area from the river to the sea.
And you are going to be thrown out, and you are not going to be allowed
Okay,
to have an
look,
election if that terminology is very much that terminology very much means destruction of Israel and the murder of the Jewish people. That terminology
really doesn't.
you will have. Well, it does, and you're going to have to find better terminology, or you're going to be thrown out before you even get started.
This is not a discussion here. Okay,
this is not a discussion.
This is not. Look, you are interrupting. You need to respect our. You need to respect. Look, if you do not respect what we are doing here, then I'm asking you to remove yourself.
If you do not respect the fact that Israel is a country by UN and everything else, and the League of Nations, and
does anyone else have any questions?
You cannot use that terminology, which is clearly genocidal terminology.
Okay.
And you
Richard,
we will use
his hand up.
pick another terminology.
Okay.
Pick a terminology for the full of the, if you want to say for the full of the mandatory.
Len, that's exactly the same terminology that the right-wing settlers use.
Okay. Does anyone else have any
Richard
questions?
sure has his hand up.
Look, you cannot control this discussion. I'm giving you one more. Look, I will be removing you.
So you remove me and you'll have nothing left.
Then can you please remove Len? Because he is kidnapping this conversation here, and that's unacceptable.
We can leave the discussion to after this, right? So can wait, and we'll talk about it later. How about it?
All right. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Questions, not comments.
Richard sure has his hand up.
All right.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
Isn't that phrase from the rivers to the sea part of the Likud manifesto? Which if it is, which I'm sure it is actually, but it cannot possibly mean the annihilation of the Israelis. If that's part of the
okay, that's not really a question. That's it's a counter comment. We are a separate government for the whole area. We are the only government that allowed the people in Israel, Palestine, from the river to the sea to vote. And that's why we chose that terminology. Any other question?
Yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be wise under the circumstances, considering that this language is pretty controversial, to change it?
The answer is this refers to a geographic area, and we should not be intimidated by the narrative. I said at the beginning, we do not follow the Israeli or the Palestinian narrative. We have our own narrative. And we should not be afraid to use geographical areas to describe who we are, and to make it easier for people to understand who we are.
But isn't this a very unspecific definition of the geographic area? And isn't this more of a polemical sentence that does not actually describe a geographical area? And therefore, isn't it likely to be misconstrued as either being in favor of one side or the other?
It may be. It may be. This is what we believe is the best description, and we do not want to follow the narrative of one side or another. We have our own narrative.
You are following the Nazi side right now.
All right.
My question.
Any other questions?
Yeah, real quick question. Did you change this from the last time where you put the Palestinian government rather than the government of the PA and Hamas?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to thank you for that, because this is something that I've been waiting for over a year, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to Mitchell. Mitchell, do you have any comments regarding this legislation?
Yeah, I am concerned about, and this kind of goes back to before, like to the point of whether or not now I'm assuming that when we're getting the Israeli and Palestinian governments to agree to this constitution, right? To this
I'm
whole
sorry,
proposal.
can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you're saying.
When we're trying to get the Israeli and Palestinian governments to agree to this whole proposal of a confederation, right?
No, we do not. We do not. This is a government that is created regardless of whether or not they agree.
Okay, but nonetheless, so you have to have the buy-in at least of the people, right? Right. That's what the
Well,
process
we
is
did.
beforehand.
We had 5 million people voting.
So, right. No, I get that. So I'm going back to that point because you're going to have, it seems to me, that certainly the Israeli government, and I think probably the Palestinian Authority as well, or government or whatever type that exists, will be campaigning against this point where the Confederation decides when they're indispensable. So what I'm asking is not, I don't think it's wrong. Okay, I don't think this framework is wrong to say that that the Confederation makes a decision when they're giving a veto power to one or both of the constituent governments. But when we're first trying to get this thing passed and agreed to by the people, I think we're going to have strong objections from the government saying, well, why did they get to decide? What if they decide that something, affects Israeli sovereignty or doesn't affect Israeli sovereignty, and we think it does? Is there some appeal process? Is there something? I think there will be strong opposition to this from the government because this does sort of disempower them, or at least it will seem to. So that's again, I don't think it's the wrong construct, but I do think it might be hard to sell.
Yeah, like I said, we are not trying to sell it to the Israeli government or the Palestinian government. We are trying to have reasonable people on both sides elect a common government, regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian governments accept it or reject it. Remember, these are failed governments. These governments failed to give in the most important part of their responsibility, which is to give peace and security to the Jewish people, the Israeli people, the Palestinian people. So this is why the one thing is we need is $100 million to explain why it is necessary to have a common government and to have voters and to gain political power. That's what we are trying to do.
Okay, I'm okay. So that makes sense on that basis. Then I'm still going to come back and say, shouldn't there maybe be some forum or some way for? Okay, so in other words, if the Confederated Legislature decides there's this law, it affects, for example, Palestinian sovereignty, but it doesn't affect Israeli sovereignty, so we're only giving a veto to the Palestinian side, right? That's what it would be. But let's say the Israelis say, well, wait a minute, we think it does affect our sovereignty, and we are going to make this argument. Shouldn't there be at least some forum where that appeal can happen? Or does that happen to the judicial branch?
It's not about making the argument. It's about whether they can block the legislation physically.
Right.
Okay?
No, I understand.
If they can block if we look at it from the practical point of view, okay? So if we want to build an airport, clearly we know that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments could block that. So we give them a veto power. But if we want to create our own budget, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments cannot block our budget, and we don't have to give them a veto power.
I
It
get
has
that.
to do with practicality, not with what.
I
you-
know but right. But that's the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is exactly about practicality. The question I'm asking is the Confederation decides one way or another that a given piece of legislation does or does not affect the sovereignty of the Israeli and the Palestinians. But let's say those people, those parties disagree. I'm not saying they should be able to block it because they disagree. I'm saying they should have, and there should be, I think, clearly delineated a process by which they can go to, say, the Supreme Court of the Confederations and make their case for why they think they should be given the option to veto, that why they think that this legislation does affect their sovereignty. They should be given some way, I think, to disagree and not just say we don't agree, but actually have that disagreement mean something with the Confederation's decision. It seems like that's kind of important for any sort of democratic process.
Look, the democratic process is within the common government, okay? You have to see our perspective. We see the Israeli government and the Palestinian government as obstacles to peace, okay? So we only give them a veto power when we have to, okay? If we do not have to, there is no point for them to go to our Supreme Court and argue against our own interest, okay? We shouldn't be giving them the power to go to our Supreme Court and make an argument that violates our own interest. We are a common government. So whether they make the right argument or not is immaterial. What's material is whether they can block us.
Right. And I think the question is whether or not they have the opportunity, they have the decision to block, is one that right now it's set up in a fashion that says we decide and you have no say in the matter. And that doesn't strike me as either just or practical. I mean, it seems like that's a recipe for trouble.
Okay, I made my argument.
Okay.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Okay. Publish the vote. 86% of the parliament members, Palestinian parliament members, voted for this legislation. Let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. Okay. Publish the votes. 78% of the Israeli parliament members voted on this legislation. So we will decide who to give a veto power specifically regarding specific legislation. All right, let's go to now specific legislation, and that is regarding what's going on right now in Israel and Gaza, rebuilding Gaza and southern Israel. Charles, can you read this? This is a two-page legislation.
Rebuilding Gaza and southern Israel. The IPC is the only government in Israel and Palestine that was legitimately elected by the entire population. The IPC elected 300 parliament members in Israel and Palestine, with approximately 125 of them being elected by the people of Gaza and the southern Israel area near the Gaza-Israel border. Over 5 million people in Gaza and Israel are directly and personally affected by the violence that has occurred since the events of October 7th and beyond. Thousands of homes, roads, and infrastructure buildings, including hospitals, have been destroyed. Law and order and civil society have been destroyed in Gaza and southern Israel. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore normal, peaceful existence to the area in Gaza and southern Israel in the foreseeable future. The future of the people of Gaza and Israel is interconnected. The IPC Parliament is obligated to the well-being of all the people in Israel and Gaza, including those constituents who were displaced from their homes in Gaza and Israel. The IPC is committed to rebuilding Gaza and southern Israel and ensuring the immediate return of all the people in Gaza and southern Israel to their homes.
Okay, just 1 second. Go on.
The IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. The IPC is calling for the immediate return of all prisoners to their homes. The IPC is calling for the rebuilding of Gaza and southern Israel by requesting a $50 billion grant from the world community, including the Israeli and Palestinian governments, to aid in the rebuilding of the areas in Gaza and southern Israel affected by the devastation. The IPC will remain the legitimate government in Israel and Palestine with jurisdiction in Gaza, while providing veto power to the Israeli and Palestinian governments on matters that affect their sovereignty. The Israeli and Palestinian governments are bestowed a veto power over this legislation.
All right, so this legislation is subject to a veto power, and then we will have, after the discussion and voting, we will give a veto power to the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President. Does anyone have any questions regarding this?
I actually have one question for clarification on the $50 billion grant. Is that going to the Confederation? Is that going to the Palestinian Israeli governments? Where is that money going?
The money is coming to us, to the common government.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions?
Giacomo has his hand up, and then I had a
question.
Okay. My question is, could the IPC offer itself as a mediator in the current conflict to bring about a ceasefire?
Yes, it could. We have legislation on that specifically.
My comment was, I would.
Questions, not comments.
Well, I think we need to add, after return of all prisoners to their homes, the immediate release of all hostages to this as well, just to make it clear.
Yeah, well, that implies that's part of the same thing. It's
True,
yeah.
but it'd be good to say it, though, I think.
What is the definition of prisoners?
Political prisoners, prisoners that are
so why doesn't it make sense to be more specific? Because if you say all prisoners, it's very unclear who you mean.
Yeah, but when you say return of all prisoners, that means that they are people that will be returned to the other jurisdiction, to the Palestinian and Israeli jurisdiction. And that means all the prisoners. Not
I don't think that's what it says. It doesn't seem like that's what it's saying.
Okay, I agree with you. That could be clarified. Okay, so I can amend this. The IPC calling for the immediate return of all. What do you want us to say?
Well, if you say to their respective jurisdictions, that sounds maybe better. Prisoner and hostages, maybe.
Yeah, that would.
We could use the word captives. Captives.
Okay.
Well, then you'd have the Israeli government arguing that they're not captives, they're prisoners.
Political prisoners and hostages would probably cover everything you want to cover here.
There's a number of other hands up, Richard and Don. And,
To their jurisdiction. Oh,
respective jurisdiction.
remember, we are a collaborative effort, Israelis and Palestinians together. We're not against each other. Okay.
And then Richard and Don and Len and Hani.
Okay, Richard. Please
Yeah,
answer.
I just put in the chat there, can we not include the building of infrastructure to support the creation of a neutral corridor between Gaza and the West Bank? Which actually would be creation, the building of infrastructure to support the creation of a neutral corridor between Gaza and the West Bank, which would be an ideal, that corridor would be something really tangible that the Confederation could control, actually. Well,
yeah, but that would be a poison pill. It's not really related to the current crisis, because that's not how it was before the crisis.
Well, it's just building the infrastructure, not actually committing, not actually the actual creation of it would come later, but you'd need
Joseph, I think Joseph's point is that that would be like a separate, that's a separate piece of legislation. This is about rebuilding Gaza and southern Israel, and that is something that is a different issue that may be very valid and useful. Although I'm not sure. I think it has some implications that I would be worried about. But
yeah,
but either way, that wouldn't be part of rebuilding Gaza and southern Israel.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I had a question. Could you clarify again who the Palestinian government that's bestowed a veto power is? This is very unclear to me.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, whatever government can block us is going to be given the veto power. So it's a fluid situation at this time, but whoever can block us from implementing this legislation will be given a veto power.
Sorry to return to the prisoner business. I think, don't you think it's still pretty unclear? Like, for example, if a Hamas person who came across the border and killed a bunch of Israelis or people, what jurisdiction would they fall under?
I don't know. I don't know what jurisdiction they will fall under. I don't really.
Maybe I should take that out, the whole thing, that paragraph.
Well, I mean, just because of a hypothetical, you're not going to throw the baby with the water.
Peter, you jumped the
and besides, like I said at the beginning, I'm asking you to look at the big picture and not get into specific details. This is not actual legislation that a committee goes over and discusses. If we actually resolve this by legislation, we will have days and days. So we cannot really resolve each and every possibility. We just look at the big picture. I'm asking you to look at the big picture. Any other question? Okay, please ask.
Joseph, this is Hani. On the prisoner aspect, I think we might have to look at, number one, defining the Palestinian government. So we should have, after the ceasefire, within 6 months, that the Palestinians have elections, because you're talking about the Palestinians being in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And also, so that way we'll have a defined government.
Let me just respond to you. We are the legitimate government of the whole area. We see the Israeli and the Palestinian governments as obstacles to peace. We are not here to advise the Israeli and the Palestinian governments how to resolve their internal conflicts. Okay. Our criteria for giving them a veto power is only if they can block us.
Okay. The other one that I was thinking of is, even if we have a ceasefire today, there are still a lot of hostilities in the West Bank between the settlers and the villagers or the towns in the West Bank, which will trigger violence in Gaza because it's a counter response. And I would include in the ceasefire paragraph some sort of language to calm the tension within the West Bank between the settlers and the West Bank folks. So we could implement a reconstruction, because a reconstruction that will be redestroyed soon after is not a reconstruction.
Well, but we are going to be the jurisdiction. We're going to have the jurisdiction in Israel, in Gaza. We are the legitimate government, and we have jurisdiction in Gaza.
Okay, but can we also refer to the violence in the West Bank so we could have a comprehensive calm down, a comprehensive ceasefire?
Yeah, we can, absolutely. The problem is you have to have Israeli parliament members voting in this, okay?
Yeah.
All right, so your question is, will the Israeli parliament members agree to legislation about Gaza that includes the West Bank and settlers? You're running the risk that they will not agree to that.
Well, I think it would be for the protection of both the Israelis and the Palestinians within the West Bank.
I understand that it may be the right thing to do, but would it pass the Israeli parliament members? Would it pass the Israeli government? It's not just a hypothetical wish list. We have to pass legislation that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian government could object to.
Yeah, but this legislation is actually about a current crisis now. And I think that what Hani is speaking about is something in general in the West Bank that's been going on for years, which doesn't, this legislation doesn't say that we can not offer new legislation to deal with what's going on in the West Bank, which
exactly.
But this is sort of an immediate,
and I invite you to send me new legislation.
Yeah,
but you don't want to throw the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict into this emergency situation.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes.
This may be another poison pill, but if you're building infrastructure, there's been an issue about independent control of that infrastructure, the ability to turn on water or whatever in Gaza. Is it too big of a stretch to specify that infrastructure replacement would be under the independent control of each government?
Again, we are the government.
Yeah, I would just add to that to what Joseph just said. Yeah, that's why it's a good idea that this is under the control of the Confederation, because it's one big government for the whole area. Number one. Number two, it would be impossible in terms of if we were looking at Gaza, it would be impossible to give Gaza control over, for example, turning the water on and off, because it's coming from Israel. The electricity, most of their electricity is coming from Israel. So physically speaking, there's just no way to do what you're, it's not necessarily a bad idea, but physically speaking, there's no way to do what you're suggesting, because all that stuff physically comes from Israel. So that's why it's necessary. The way you have it as an independent control is by having the Confederation be the entity that controls it.
Any other questions?
Just wondering, do you let the Prime Minister to also veto or not veto this? I haven't seen it.
Yes. We are giving the Israeli and the Palestinian governments a veto power over this, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do anything. They can block us.
No, I mean here in this.
Yes.
In this
Look
simulation.
at look at the last line on your screen.
Any other questions?
Yes, you're talking about prisoners. Who are you talking about prisoners? Are you talking of hostages? Or are you talking about murderers that are in Israeli jails?
We're talking about Palestinians in Israeli jails and the hostages that were taken by Hamas, and all the prisoners and hostages, all of them.
Joseph, on the fourth paragraph, what do you mean with the jurisdiction in Gaza? The IPC will remain the legitimate government in Israel and Palestine, but jurisdiction in Gaza. What do you mean by that?
Just emphasizing that that we have jurisdiction. We actually have jurisdiction in all of it, but this is just an emphasis on Gaza. It's not anything different than all of the area. But since we are speaking about Gaza, and Gaza needs to be rebuilt, we are just emphasizing our jurisdiction in Gaza.
So there'll still be Hamas. There'll still be those other entities, right?
No, Hamas will be gone, and Gaza will be rebuilt by
like I said,
an international community.
Like I said, this is a fluid situation in Israel and Gaza. Okay.
Yeah, but
I, as the president, chose to leave it vaguely and to discuss issues as they are presented at the time, rather than declare the end of any government, because that by itself would create a bad atmosphere.
No, it may create a new Palestine.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Hearing no questions, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote.
What's the vote?
On this legislation.
Which is what?
Read it.
I did, but we keep talking about
Are you a parliament member?
Yes.
What, Israeli or Palestinian?
I'm an Israeli parliament member.
Okay, so you'll have to decide whether you want to vote or not.
I want to vote on what?
On whatever is presented in front of you. Okay, publish the vote.
Wait, I didn't vote.
No, you're Israeli. This is Palestinian parliament. Okay, 90% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. We are asking for $50 billion from the world community, including the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, to give us the funds. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members. Okay. Publish the vote. 82% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No veto.
Okay. Let's go to the Palestinian president. Are you going to veto this legislation? Okay, let's go back to the Israeli Prime Minister. Prime Minister, how much money are you willing to give us in order to rebuild southern Israel and Gaza? We need $50 billion.
10 billion.
Thank you. Let's go to the Palestinian parliament member. With the Palestinian president, I'm sorry. Palestinian president, please vote.
I'm sorry, I was putting in a comment. I vote for it.
Okay, and how much money are you willing to give us in order?
The amount that the parliament calls for. I'm sorry, busy on
We are
that.
asking for $50 billion from the world community.
Yes,
And we're
I agree.
asking for the Palestinian parliament members to participate.
I
and
agree with that.
contribute.
Not vetoing it.
You're not vetoing it.
No,
Okay, but how much money are you willing to give us?
the $50 million.
You don't have $50 billion.
I'm sorry. I got too lot hooked into this comment I was typing out. I go along with the parliament. How does that sound?
Well, we have not allocated what we want.
I'll give the maximum amount as we have. How does that answer it? Tell me that amount and I'll give it to you because there's a huge amount to rebuild Gaza and southern.
Okay. All right. So we are asking you to give us $2.5 billion in the next 3 years.
I agree to that because it's
All
going
right,
to
thank
take at
you.
least that to rebuild
Okay.
Gaza.
Okay. Since we are already an hour and a half, I'm just going to go and now have the let's have Mitchel make your comments.
So first of all, I applaud the generosity of the Israeli and Palestinian leaders. I suspect in reality, a lot more of that money needs to come from outside. I don't see Israel being able to come up with $10 billion for this. Much less do I see the Palestinians being able to come up with $3 billion. So a lot more will have to happen. And I think, but I think, you know, this is one place where I think we have a very good opportunity for a couple of things. One, you know, the money that you can get from the United States, Europe, Saudi Arabia, the rest of the Gulf states, easily can cover $50 billion. I don't think that's a problem. And I think this is a strength. And I really want to stress this. I think this is a strength of the IPC, because what this would mean is that money going to the IPC is why I asked this question earlier. That money going to the IPC is a big deal because particularly the Europeans have seen a lot of their construction funds get destroyed by Israeli operations. You know, it's a lot of money. They build up something, they go in, they you know, it's there for a little while and then it gets destroyed. And I think that is something that limits the ability to get more funding. So this is a really strong way around that. Where I think we need to also look very carefully is what is being rebuilt. And I think one of the questions I have is when we talk about rebuilding southern Israel and we talk about rebuilding Gaza.
Hello?
One of the things that
Hey, what's up with that?
one of the things that would
It was very good, very quiet.
I'm sorry, is someone else talking?
Okay, go ahead.
One of the questions that comes to my mind is Israel right now, especially given everything that has gone on. I think Israelis are very much going to want to rebuild the security barrier and the various systems that are there in Gaza and around Gaza, and that are a key part of the siege of Gaza. And I have to ask, is that, you know, I think that's going to be an issue. I think that's going to be a question that will have to be addressed. Is that something that's going to be rebuilt with this money? Does Israel have the option of rebuilding it with their own money? That is, you know, when we talk about rebuilding, what are we putting back in place? I think is a big question. We are talking, you know, we have to, I think, prioritize. Well, just let me finish this point. We have to, I think, prioritize, the absolutely literally destroyed cities in Gaza City, Beit Lahia. We've seen the images there. These cities have been completely leveled. Most of the infrastructure is gone. That has to be a priority. But the question of exactly what gets rebuilt, how does it get rebuilt, what does it look like after, what are the conditions of it, I think is a little more complicated than just deciding that we're going to have this money to do. So I'm suggesting that this legislation is good and it's going to require subsequent legislation on top of it. I'm not saying it has to all be in here. It does have to, but there does have to be more than this.
Yeah, just to answer your question, it says thousands of homes, roads, and infrastructure buildings, including hospitals, have been destroyed.
Right. And I know that would be a priority. I wasn't questioning that. My question is, is this money also going to go to rebuilding the barrier that was breached, rebuilding the surveillance systems that might have been damaged or destroyed? Because I think Palestinians might object to that. And on the other hand, I think Israelis might demand it. So that's going to be something to really work out.
The idea is that the IPC will be able to make peace without, and we can think of legislation. You're raising an excellent point. We can think of a legislation that would eliminate the need for all these fences and walls and all of that. So but that's a new legislation.
Right,
So
it would be separate. That's
Yeah.
what I'm suggesting.
yeah, all right. So let's have a post simulation survey after participating.
I have a question.
Of course you do.
The Hamas over the last 20 years has spent almost all of the money that they've received from all over the world, not on building hospitals and hotels and schools for kids.
Hey,
but have been
Len,
why
we
don't
are
you
not
let me-
open to questions at this time. I didn't ask for questions. Let's
So
have
you
the
think-
post. No, you are kidnapping the
I'm
conversation.
gonna,
It's unacceptable what you're doing. Okay, this is not open to question. This is a simulation. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza that will coexist with the Israeli and Palestinian government? Please vote. Okay, I know we have more voters, so please vote. I'll give it 30 more seconds to vote. Okay. 10 more seconds, please vote. All right, go ahead and publish the vote. 23 out of 24, 96% voted yes, and 1 out of 24 voted no, which is 4%. We had more voters at the beginning, but the percentage went up substantially from 81 to 96%, which is very good increase. So these are my closing remarks, and then we'll go to open discussion. I believe that a common federal government is a possibility. It would take somewhere around $100 million to create it. It could make peace. We could have an election. The country of Estonia has elections online. The US government has Social Security and taxes online. There's no reason why we cannot have an online election in Israel, Palestine. And it's a minuscule amount of money for the purpose of making peace. And I'm asking you to join our next simulations. And let me show you what $100 million could also buy you. And it could, and the same amount of money could make peace with Israel and Palestine. And let's go to open discussion. And you can ask Mitchel the questions. I thought it was excellent. Let's go to questions, but please ask Mitchel questions, or you can ask. Now it's time also for you to make comments as well. First one is Samir. And then Hani, and then Len, and then Margot. Okay, Samir, go ahead.
Okay, hi everybody. All right, I have a comment. I don't have a question. And my comment is regarding to the veto power. When you wrote the constitution for the IPC, and that's probably for you, Joseph, when you wrote, I mean, when you added or you put the veto power, you gave the veto power to all parties or both parties, whatever. Were you thinking of an example that veto power worked? Like, were you thinking of the United Nations Security Council, for instance? Were you thinking of that?
I was thinking of the veto power that the President of the United States has, and the veto power really that the in a way. I mean, it's
No,
you're
but
speaking about
yeah,
a
what
veto
I meant,
power,
I mean,
but if you think about it, everyone has a veto power a in a in a parliamentary district, in a parliamentary system. So yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking of as an institution, I mean, like the Security Council. Of course, you were thinking of that as a model. I mean, I'm not talking about individual, I mean, president, whatever. I'm talking about as an institution. So you were thinking of something like the United Nations Security Council. All right.
No,
So
not
looking,
really. I was thinking about the president of the United States because
all
I don't
right,
think it's
whatever.
comparable.
Okay, well,
The UN is not comparable, if that's where you're
what-
leading, because the UN is not really a government of the people, it's a government of governments.
well, still, I mean, it is a democratic institution. I mean, you cannot say that it is, you
The
cannot
UN is
compare.
not a democratic, no one elects the UN.
Yeah, the UN is not a democratic institution.
All right. You're, I mean, what you were thinking as an institution, just as an institution, that thinking that the veto power will work, taking the history of the United Nations Security Council in regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Throughout that history, that veto power was held by the United States to veto every resolution was not good for Israel. So it never worked. For the last 75 years, that veto power never worked. Now, thinking about your IPC, you give the veto power to both parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians. Looking at it, looking at the situation, you have an occupier, the Israelis, Israel is the occupier, and you have the Palestinians occupied. And you're given the veto power to both parties. Well, obviously, the occupier will veto everything. It's not good for them. So you're talking about, I mean, the occupied person, the veto power for the occupied person doesn't mean anything. Nothing. The veto power will be taken advantage by the occupier, the Israeli occupier, and they will veto everything you propose. As an IPC, you're talking about this and that and that and that. Nothing will happen. Nothing, everything that Israeli government will veto. And that occupation will maintain forever. So it seems to me like, I mean, having the veto power, that's against the whole thing. I mean, the IPC project is dead from the start. It will never work.
Well,
so why having the veto power? I mean, take it out. No veto power. If you want something to work, no, you don't give them the veto power. Because Israel is going to take the advantage of it and veto everything. And we'll come back to square one from now, 60 years from now. Just
okay,
like I'm in the UN, giving the veto power to the Security Council, the United States taking advantage of it for the benefit of Israel. For 75 years, nothing happened.
Samir, the purpose of giving the Israeli and the Palestinian veto power is because if you do not give them a veto power, they have a great excuse to claim that the IPC intention is to undermine the Jewish state of Israel. But the veto power gives them a safety net that and it takes away their potential argument that the IPC intends to undermine the Jewish state of Israel. Now, personally, I am in favor of one state, but it's that's my personal view. I'm in favor of one state, but you have to.
I am too. I mean,
but you have to. You have to show would it be possible to dismantle the Israeli government? In my opinion, it's not. So if you create a system without a veto power, then you don't get the buy-in from the Israeli population at all, because the Israeli government will have a huge argument against the IPC, because it would say that the purpose of the IPC is to undermine Israel as a Jewish state. So you will achieve a lot less, or if anything, without the veto power.
well, I mean,
let's hear from Mitchell.
It's an opinion, but
yeah.
I think, I tend to agree with Joseph here. I think this is I think this is a necessary precondition, number one. Number two, there are good political pressures that exist. See, one of the problems that you're pointing to, you're comparing it to the United Nations. There is virtually no political pressure on the United States, either internationally or domestically, to change its behavior at the UN, to not use its veto the way it has. And by the way, it's not only the United States. Russia's used the veto power for its own ends many, many times. China's used it on occasion as well.
Not in regard to Israel. No, Russia used it
actually
before.
That's not true. Russia has used it in regards to Israel on the other side, but that's again, that's not that's the issue of the veto power at the UN is not the model that we're looking at here, because there's no political consequence. Russia decides, the United States, let's lose the United States. The United States decides to use its veto power. Nobody complains. There's no political downside. And if they don't use it,
well,
there's,
I mean, the other
no real political. Can I finish, please?
Yeah.
There's there is no political downside in the United States to anything it does at the UN, because most Americans don't pay any attention to what happens in the UN. That's not going to be the case in here. Okay, if the idea behind the veto power, as I understand it, as I look at it, is that it incentivizes the Confederation to craft legislation that's good for both sides.
Exactly.
And if it does that, and Israel then turns around or Palestine, either side, turns around and vetoes it, uses its veto power just out of, we're not going to agree to anything, I think those leaders will be voted out, and that will change over time. That is not what happens with the UN. There's no space for that. There's no political forum for it. Nobody votes for their political leaders based on how the United States behaves at the UN. Nobody. Neither people who support Palestine, neither people who support Israel. Nobody is voting based on the actions at the United Nations. That would not be the case in this confederation. And so with political pressures being there, you have some hope. Look, it may not work, but, frankly, is it going to be any worse than what we have now? Again, I don't see how. I don't see how it makes things any worse. So as it stands right now, you have basically a free, not, I don't want to say chaotic. I mean more, but there's no, there's no reining in. Either side does what it wants, and it's a question of who has the power. Israel has the power.
Yeah.
So Israel does what it wants. This way,
That's
there is some political. This way, according to, there's at least a hope. It may or may not work. You may be right. Maybe it won't work, but there's at least a hope and a path to political pressures.
Okay, let's go to the. Let me read the order of questions.
There is no equal sides.
Hey, Joseph, can people lower their hands?
The order of questions.
Joseph, before that, can you ask people to lower their hands, because some people had their hands up and they spoke?
Yeah,
so that
if you have asked a question, please lower the hand, and then you can bring it up again if you want to ask. Okay, the order is Hani Shafai, Margot Schuller, Len Bennett, Sean Czar, Karen McKnight, Ziva Inbar, Richard Shires, Shlomo Orr. So let's go to Hani right now.
Well, I want to thank you all for the really lively discussion. One of the things that we're really forgetting is we're assuming the current existing volatile situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. our process, the simulation, Joseph, started before the incidents, before October 7th,
Correct.
as we all remember. And our goal was to provide solution and to provide peace and security for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. We have to look at the past history. You know, we're talking about two-state solutions, two people, two different governments, and
No,
what
we're
have you.
not. We're not talking about two-state
We're
solutions.
assuming that, you know, like our simulation assumes that those will exist in the future.
No,
let's give
that's not
some.
true. That's
let
not
me just,
absolutely not true.
yeah, let me just finish, Joseph, please. We should give credit to the good Israelis and the good Palestinians, and let us not just remember, and let us not just count the bad people on both sides. Netanyahu, you know, his government is radical. There is no doubt about it. Hamas is a radical organization. So it's like there are bad people on both sides, and we have to give credit to the good people. You know, let us assume in our simulation that there will be one nation that has laws that protect both people, and let us not even assume that there are both people. There are one people that live side by side. They did that for many years before the establishment of Israel, and they did that before, you know, the interference of the superpowers into that conflict. So I think, you know, it exists right now. There are Palestinians. There is about 1.5 to 1.8 million Palestinians live within Israel, and they carry Israeli passport, and they're members of the Knesset. It worked. You don't see violence. They respectfully voice their opinion, and they have this lively discussions with other radical parties in the Israeli government, and they still come out alive, both of them. So it's like, that exists. Let's expand that and include the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and set up a constitution that set up who is the president and who is the prime minister and who is the foreign minister and who's the defense minister, in such a way that will protect all the rights of the people that exist within that region. And let us not give veto power to this or that, because the veto power will never work. You know, it hardly works with one person be in charge, which is the president of the United States and the American system. You think it will work with two different parties, two different governments that are going to have pushback from their own members? Even if you have a moderate president on both sides, you know, you may have radical members, just similar to the current Israeli government, and that will lead to a stalemate on both sides and will never accomplish anything. So I really do believe that we should exchange our concept and give credit to the good Israelis and good Palestinians that exist within that region. And there is a lot of them.
Mitchel, do you want to respond?
I mean, I would just say that that's exactly what this plan does. That it allowed what we have now, as we have in most political bodies, is, you know, you have people on you know, who wield political power, who have disproportionate amount of say over what you know, what governments do. That's true whether it's a democracy or a dictatorship. That you know, you can see that in the United States. You can see it in Russia. You can look in all sorts of different places. So I think actually what this is doing is actually trying to increase the power of people, Israelis and Palestinians, who want to live together. Exactly. And it gives them a vehicle for political, again, what I was saying before, to create political pressure to get what they want. And I think that is exactly what is needed. I'm putting in mind, you know, I spoke to Joseph earlier this week, and he reminded me, I met him first about 15 years ago, and he reminded me that what I told him back then when he first presented to me this idea was that I think it's the only thing that can really work. It's not because I think it's perfect. It's far from perfect. You know, I don't think there is a perfect solution. There are a lot of questions and a lot of ways its implementation can be derailed by bad actors. But it also provides opportunity for good actors, good faith people who want to actually live together and who respect the rights of all of the people in Israel, in the West Bank, and Gaza, in all of those places, to have that equality. So, you know, again, look, there's never going to be a plan that you can't look at, that a serious-minded person can't look at and take apart and say, this is why it'll never work. And it's a recipe for doing nothing. Obviously, that is not my choice. I have been doing this work professionally for 20 years and academically for another 15 before that. So I'm obviously not interested in arguments that just say nothing can work. We need to do better than that. We need to actually, and I think you're pointing to exactly what we need to do, which is empower the people who are acting in good faith, who respect one another, who reject violence as the way forward, and who accept the idea that all people must have equal rights for there to be a reasonable resolution. Any solution that's going to work is going to be based on the idea that Israelis and Palestinians have equal rights and that those rights need to be respected, and a recognition that that's not the case right now. So once we establish that as a base, we can move forward, and this is a vehicle to make that happen.
All right, let's go to Margot. Margot, please. Margot Schulter.
Yes, I can. I'm unmuted now, I think.
Yeah.
And right now, I'm still speaking within the simulation as the representative of Nazareth. And I'm representing district in Nazareth. And that is in Al-Jalil, or the Galilee. And that's a predominantly Palestinian Arab area within Israel. And I'm just speaking for democracy. And I was reminded both of the potentials. I think that this proposal does bring out the potential for democracy. And I want to say that the phrase "from the river to the sea" means the opposite of the tragedy that's happened in the last 75 years. It means no ethnic cleansing, and it means no genocide. It means no killing. It means democracy and equal rights and human dignity for everyone, for Palestinian Arabs and for Israeli Jews. That's what "from the river to the sea" means. And there may be some extremists who want to interpret it another way. And there's some people who've carried out these horrible policies for 75 years. And there's some people who maybe understandably have revenge fantasies on the other side. And we don't mean any of that. I just want to make that very clear. But there was a woman who could be my rightful constituent. I'm very concerned about her rights, because I know that the purpose of the Confederation is to advance democracy. And there is a woman who's been a refugee from Al-Nakba for the last 75 years who spoke. I'm sorry I didn't get her name, but she should be voting for the Knesset now if she wishes to exercise her right of repatriation and return. Or as it said in Arabic, haq al-auda, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the right of return. And until that right of return is carried out, democracy will not have its complete meaning. And I think that's the tragedy. There's a lot of invisible structural violence going on in Palestine. That displacement is part of the tragedy. And I'm just looking for any path to peace. That's why I participate in these simulations, because you must not reject any path to get there. But I'm just very concerned about, I want to stop the violence, the structural violence of Al-Nakba, because Al-Nakba has also enabled Al-Naqsa. Al-Naqsa was the setback after 1967 of the occupation, because there could not be such a brutal occupation were it not for the fact that Palestinian Arabs have been denied their rightful place in the politics of Israel. Because the design of a Jewish state, 3 days from now, will have the 76th anniversary of UN Resolution 181, which provided the Jewish state would be the area where you'd have free Jewish immigration, which of course has happened under the law of return. But that it did not provide for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the area that was designated from the Jewish state, which is then 56% of historical Palestine. And that was a tragedy, because it permitted extremists and rejectionists, if I may say, Israeli governments, which have carried out inhumane policy. I'm looking at this in a balanced way. I'm looking from the perspective of binational narrative. I represent the horrors. I recognize the horrors of the massacre at Hebron in 1929, as well as Deir Yassin, of course, in 1948. And a true binational narrative must represent the pain and the suffering that's happened on all sides. We must restore this living together however we can. And I believe that the right of the refugees to return is a critical part of that. And that applies to Jewish refugees as well, because it applies at places, say, like Kafir or Gush Etzion, because there was a massacre there on May 13th, 1948. And now because of the occupation, that community has been restored. It should remain restored when the occupation is dissolved. And I think the living together is what we must have. And I voted for the legislation to deal with the immediate consequences of the tragedy that began October 7th. But I think we must look at the larger picture, the 75 years of pain that have been continuous.
Yeah.
This is, yes.
I agree. All right, let's go to, let me read the order again. Len Bennett, Sean Czar, Karen McKnight, Ziva, Inbar, Richard, Shires, Shlomo Orr, and Todd Pierce, and Giacomo Valentini. Mitchell, did you want to respond to?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, let's go to Len Bennett. Ask your question, please.
Okay, I'm not asking a question. These are comments now.
Yeah.
I grew up in the province of Quebec. I was a minority in the province of Quebec. I did not feel I had a right to kill Frenchmen, and any more than the Arabs living in Israel have a right to try to kill Arabs. Now, first of all, when you use things such as river to the sea, this is clearly an anti-Semitic comment, and that must be removed immediately. Even the map you put down, which shows various parts of Israel and occupied territory, that is against the law. I know you don't like it, but it's against the law of the land, going from the League of Nations to the United Nations specifies that Israel includes all of the British mandate for Palestine, which means it includes the West Bank and Gaza and Judea and Samaria. Now, first of all, there is a war going on now. The war is not going to stop. Calling to stop the war is a call to kill Jews, because the Arabs have said that they're going to do this over and over and over and over and over again, which is taking babies and putting them in ovens, gouging the eyes out of old people, capturing teenagers. I am sorry. This is not going to happen again. Israel is going to totally eliminate Gaza, totally eliminate Hamas, and the occupation. Israel will occupy Gaza, and Israel will work to the point where Palestinians, if they wish to live in Israel, will tolerate living in peace alongside Israel, and not have a dream of the river to the sea and getting rid of the Jews. And if they don't like it, they can bloody well go. There are 56 Muslim countries in the world.
Wait a second. Do you give them equal rights or not? Yes or no? Just answer.
I can't hear you.
Do you give the Arabs, do you give all the Palestinians living in the whatever between the river and the sea, everybody has the same rights? Agree or disagree?
No, you know why? Because you're lazy and because you're corrupt. You're lazy and you're corrupt. And if you don't take...
You realize you're talking to an Israeli right now, right?
Okay,
yeah,
Shlomo.
Right. And don't talk to me. No.
Shlomo,
I didn't ask about me. I asked about your opinion.
Oh, you did.
Say yes or no, and that's it. You say no.
I think everybody has the right to do whatever they can in their own capacity, and everybody has no right to stop anybody else from advancing as far as they can, which means you cannot have militias which are not part of a government agency. You can't have mafia and mafia that
Wait a
goes after your
second.
people.
You say no.
Let's go to Mitchell to respond, please. Mitchell.
I don't have a response to him.
Okay.
It's not
All
worth
right.
responding to.
Okay, let's
seriously.
go to
That kind of
Sean.
racism really needs to be just ignored.
Yeah,
Okay.
your kind of racist is also
Okay,
pretty.
no, wait.
pretty,
Let's go to Sean. Sean.
Okay.
You know something?
Can you hear me?
You're a guest here. You have no right to talk like that.
Yeah.
Okay,
let's go to Sean. Sean.
Shara, yeah.
Okay.
Sean.
Okay. Just a question, Joseph. Earlier, Mitchell was talking about the controversial between Israel and Palestine and the IPC, that they are that they don't agree with the IPC, that even with the support of the people who agreed to have the IPC in power, but there still will be some debate, like there still will be Israel trying to undermine the IPC, even with the support of the people of that whole area, right? So you think somehow Israel will try to circumvent the IPC and try to bring up a point in that way? Because what Mitchell was mentioned earlier about this controversial with the IPC, that it's not.
You want to get a
really
couple
what
of
Israel
jars
wants.
of
Honey, you need to mute. Okay, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, so my thing is with what Mitchell said earlier. He said that this is a controversial with the IPC, and Israel don't want the IPC in power, even with it in place and people agreeing to have the IPC in power. So yeah, and like Israel will try to beat around the bush with it, and it will continue to undermine the IPC one way or another. Right? That's
I totally agree. In my opinion, both sides would try to undermine the IPC.
Yeah.
But the IPC needs to have a political power. It needs to have the power of the people. It's like any other government system. There are, even in America, they are trying to undermine each other. The question is, do they have the legitimacy to do what they really want? And the answer is, if we have enough power, if we have the power of the people, this is really what it's about, the power of the people, and showing that they are not able to give peace and security to their people, then we have a good chance. But let's hear what Mitchell said.
So just to clarify, I as it happened in that example, I used Israel, but I agree with Joseph. Both, governments in general, right? What are we talking? We're talking about a confederation that would, in some way, have. I mean, it's pledged not to undermine the government, but any government is going to look at this and say, we don't want this, because in some way it's going to limit their freedom of decision, which it's kind of designed to do, not because it's trying to undermine the government, but because it is trying to empower people who are looking to live together, who are looking to progress and look to. So, and that is not what we have. That is not what we have, certainly in the Hamas government before this. It's not what we have in the Palestinian Authority. It's certainly not what we have in the Netanyahu government. Or frankly, the preceding Netanyahu governments, the Bennett government. We can look at this for many years, and we see that's just the nature of government. So yes, there's going to be efforts by the governments to undermine these things, but the idea is that you've created here, unlike in most, unlike really anywhere else I can really think of, you'd be creating here a situation where people of goodwill would actually have a political vehicle with real power that would try to make progress despite those things. We don't have that now. There really isn't anything there now. I mean, you can look at various political parties. I mean, if you look at, for example, what are the choices if in 2006, what were the two major choices Palestinians had? They had Fatah, they had Hamas. That was the two choices that they had. A plurality ended up, going with Hamas, but it was mostly, it was very split. Nobody was enthusiastic about anyone. We see the same thing really here in the United States. There's very few people that are thrilled with either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. You have to make a choice. In Israel, we look at the opposition, and the you have this government, and then you have an opposition that has people like Gideon Sa'ar and people like Avigdor Lieberman that are key figures in that opposition. So it's entirely a highly ideological right-wing government. this gives a vehicle for the people. What happened here now that we've seen a ceasefire for a few days and release of some hostages? The key reason that happened was because of the families of the hostages who marched from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, who were protesting, who were confronting the right wingers, because there wasn't actually an opening for them to do it. The government was trying to keep them quiet. They took it anyway. They forced their way in and said, you are going to hear us. You are going to hear what we're saying, and you're going to actually, go against what you want and actually take into account the lives of our family members, which they really were not doing before. It was the hostage families that forced them to do it. This creating a vehicle for people of goodwill to actually create political pressure for positive change is a step forward. Again, it's not I applaud Joseph for not presenting this as a cure-all. It's not a perfect solution. There's going to be problems. There's problems with anything, any way you want to move forward, right? But this is and yes, there will absolutely be elements in both governments that will oppose things just for the sake of opposing them, that will oppose them because they not because it's bad for Israel or for Palestine, but because it's bad for their political power. Okay, sure, that's going to happen. That's called politics. It's inevitable. This gives a tool to fight against that. It's something. Will it work? Will it necessarily win? I have no idea. Until we try it, we won't really know. But right. it certainly has the potential to be better than what we have right now, where it's just a question of who has the most power.
Sean, did you want to ask another question or?
No, I'm good.
Okay, let's go to Ziva. Ziva Imbar.
Hi. Just in continuation, exactly about the same thing, that power for the people. The way I understand it, maybe it's a naive way of understanding this project. It's like it has two stages. Only the second stage will have, this organization can have operative power, like to get $50 billion and to build infrastructure. Anyway, nowadays you have to go by Israeli law in the areas of Israel, etc. So the first stage, the more important power is not the operative, it's a declarative, expressive for the people. So if this organization sets it up in a high-level way, that it has credit, that it has no fraud inside the voting, and the people, the 5 million people that registered and voted, it's all good credit, professional credit. It has huge power to express the people and to go over the government and the corruption at that level. So it's direct power, because if you have credited a speech to the people by this mean, it has huge power, and all the manipulations of the government and the other powers get it can overcome it. So one question in continuation to this, did you think of having a referendum structure, or only the
election?
Or the electors, like senators?
Right. I don't think a referendum is a good idea, because it will not pass a referendum. They will destroy the referendum. They will to give the Israelis and the Palestinians the idea to ask them, do you think it's a good idea? No government in the world ever does that. No democracy in the world ever has a referendum, including the Israeli government. But to actually have the election.
I did not mean a referendum, maybe is to have this project set up. No, when you have the 300 senators and it works, and you have these legislations and everything, and sometimes every now and then you have a referendum, like maybe in Switzerland. I don't really know how they work. Yeah. Sometimes they have in special questions to have a specific vote, a referendum vote.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
That
we can't hear you very well, Ziva, but I know what you're asking about. and someone else suggested that, and I think that's a good idea, to have a system like they have in states in the United States where you can pass a proposition. And the public can vote on that referendum. Yes, that's a good idea.
Okay, so just to sum up the veto question and all that, it's all connected to the operative level. And but even if this organization gets a decision that it has a huge majority voting for it in this, and Israel gives it a veto, so it won't start action, but it's a huge power that to say that 4 million people are behind this thing that Israel is vetoing, it's still huge power.
Right. Your political power. Absolutely. Mitchell, did you want to respond?
No, I mean, I don't really have much to add to that. I think I don't see anything in what your constitution has that prevents a referendum. So I think they can, you know, the parliament could always just decide to hold one, and it's fine. I think I'm a big fan of referenda. I think they generally are, you know, they're good ways to facilitate democracy. So
right. Okay, let's go to Richard Shiras.
Correct. Yes, Shiras. It's from Scotland. So point referendum with the British here, you know, but Brexit, but we'll move on. I wanted to say really that I think in principle, this idea of confederation seems really good, but I think personally, I think you really have to precede that by the establishment of a full, proper Palestinian state. The UN in 47, when they passed that resolution, they sort of messed up. And when Israel declared its independence, I think it's unique possibly in a world where a country has passed into being a state of declared independence without some sort of recognized geographical sense of what their borders are. And so we left with that situation. If we've just had, and it may well resume, this is the most intensive bombing that there has ever been since the Second World War. And the poison this is putting out, it'll take generations. You're sort of like 20 years down the road before this is starting to come together and there's more trust. But I think an establishment of a Palestinian state, an overall settlement where there's a conditionality about establishing a confederation subsequently would be a great idea. And I also think there is reason to have some hope in Israel that there is some more progressiveness and a response to this situation, because there's been a great deal of suppression of dissent in Israel in the last 6 weeks. And I think after Netanyahu's war, which is what I think this is, because it's all about him trying to avoid ultimately his corruption stuff, I think there will be shifts internally within Israel, and there is sort of reason to hope there. But you know, until you get that Palestinian state, and this needs to be really imposed, and it needs America to come forward and act like a grown-up, which at the moment, I'm afraid, the State Department in America it's in bed with Netanyahu's lot. It's just really in the wrong place at the moment. But so anyway, that's
so Richard, are you suggesting we put this on hold until there is 2 states?
No, I think you should still be exploring ways that this can develop and be a more workable solution, because ultimately that needs to be pulled down and explored more, you know, and developed more. So I think this is very, very worthwhile doing something like this.
And if there is no 2 states, to just wait until there is 2 states?
I think we've got to keep talking about 2 states. We really do have to start, because
I know, but the 2 state has been developed since 1947.
Well, it's not really. I'm sorry. The problem was you had the whole myth around the Nakba, which prevailed through the 50s, which actually meant that it wasn't really getting diplomatic attention that it deserved. And then once Israel, with the 67 war, there was a lot of resolutions passed against that. There hasn't been a really honest.
The UN voted on a two-state.
Yes, yeah, I'm fine with that. But in terms of actually trying to get a proper peace settlement, the sort of attempts that Clinton made with the Oslo Accords, that wasn't really an honest brokerage at all. And the subsequent what followed it with Camp David. So
okay, I'll let Mitchel answer, but my response is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We don't have to wait until we're done with one another. But let's hear from Mitchel. What do you think?
Well, so a couple things. First of all, I mean, there have been a number of comments around various history. I mean, we can go through I've been studying the history of Zionism in Israel for 40 years. Okay. I mean, I can sit here and I can correct assumptions that are being made that are inaccurate on all sides. And we can get bogged down in all of that forever. But we're talking here really about a path forward. And while you can't ignore history, when trying to figure out how to move forward, you also can't afford to try and correct every historical wrong and address every twist and turn that history has taken. So having said that, I agree to some extent. First of all, I for a long time held on to two states. I don't believe it's practical anymore. This is aside from the question of this confederation. I don't believe it's something that's doable. I think we saw what happened just from the meager withdrawal from Gaza and 4 settlements in the West Bank 18 years ago. Trying to replicate that with 800,000 settlers, which is the only way I think you're going to get a two-state solution at this point, I think is insane. I mean, there's just no way it could work. And not to mention the fact that there's infrastructure issues that just make it physically very, very difficult. Look, having said that, also, I wouldn't take two states off any kind of table. I mean, I think it's fine to push for two states. I just don't think that should be the exclusive focus. The question for the Confederation, I think, is the question of if we're giving both sides, as we said, a veto over legislation that affects their sovereignty, and we're trying to get buy-in from both sides in terms of a confederation. Well, we have obviously an Israeli state that exists. We have an Israeli leadership. We have a Knesset. We have a prime minister. We have all of that has clear legitimacy, even if many people, even if virtually all of Israel at this point is against Netanyahu, he's still the prime minister, and nobody would argue that he still has the power and the authority to make decisions. That's not really the case at this point with the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority is not actually enjoying very much legitimacy among the Palestinians. It's not internationally recognized, by the way, which nobody, which is something that is conveniently forgotten. The recognized Palestinian leadership for international conversations and diplomacy is the PLO, not the PA. So now Mahmoud Abbas is the head of both of those. That doesn't have to be the case. It is for now. He's 87. We'll see what happens. But I agree, there should be a stronger Palestinian structure that can make these decisions in order for this confederation to happen. Having said that, I also agree with what Joseph said. We're not going to sit around, sitting around and waiting for that to happen. I think it's futile. And I think that actually pursuing something like this confederation can help galvanize some kind of legitimate Palestinian leadership that is independently arrived at. And I think that's an important step. A Palestinian leadership that Palestinians, not Israel, not the United States, not the international community, a Palestinian leadership that Palestinians decide on without any outside interference, I think is a crucial step to any solution, whether it's two states, one state, confederation, whatever you want to talk about. So I think that part of it is very important. I think it's important to be able to look beyond two states, even if you support two states. In other words, I'm saying it's fine to support two states. You believe that's the solution, that's fine. Let it be on the table with other ones. If it's really the best solution, it'll win out. I don't believe it is anymore. I think it once was. I do think, I look back at the times when I supported two states and I believe I look back and I said at that time, I still believe I was right. It was the best solution. I don't think it really is anymore. And I think that I think the key right now is that whatever the solution is, it has to be based on equality. It has to be based on the recognition that Palestinians and Israelis have equal rights. I do want to make one comment about, and I've heard this a few times, that this is Netanyahu's war. I've had a lot to say about the nature of this assault on Gaza. And what it is and what it is not, what it's purported to be and what it's supposed to be. But what should not be lost, and you can look, at my work and just look for my stuff in the last month, and you'll see what I've said about it. And it is definitely an indictment of Netanyahu. I think that Israel has disregarded the hostages for the most part until it absolutely had no choice. I think it has not pursued the best interests of the Israeli people here. And I think, frankly, it hasn't actually been going after Hamas. There's a whole, I have a whole bunch of articles here on what has actually been happening. But all of that being said, we must not lose sight of the fact that this war still, this chapter, Antonio Guterres was right. The October 7th attack did not happen in a vacuum. Nonetheless, it did happen, and it was horrific. It was 1,200 Israelis and 1,200 Israelis and foreigners killed. It was thousands injured. It was something Israel has not witnessed in its entire history. Right. And it's witnessed a lot of these kinds of attacks. We should not minimize what happened on October 7th. We should not forget it. We should not excuse it. The argument, and it's an important argument, do Palestinians have a right to resist occupation? Absolutely, they do. Do they have a right to use weapons and arms and violence to do that? Yes, they do, like any other occupied people. That does not apply to what happened on October 7th. Okay, it does not. It applies to the areas of October 7th where they attacked soldiers in Israel. That, yes. But the attacks on the rave, the many civilians that were killed, the taking of hostages, none of that applies to the right to resist. Okay, so these were clear criminal acts. And I think it is really, really important that, yes, we understand that it did happen in a context, but that context doesn't justify what in any way or mitigate in any way what this was, which was an enormous crime. I'm talking to people, friends of mine, just before this session, which I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I was talking to friends of mine whose niece is still in Gaza, and her husband is still in Gaza, and they're hoping that their niece, who is a woman in her 30s, I believe, will be among those released right now. But they've gone through several of these now, and she's still there in Gaza, and they're very worried. These people, by the way, are anti-Zionists. They are not big supporters of Israel. They have a relationship with the country, as do I.
Right.
It is a serious trauma, and it's easy to forget, because for the 7 or I guess we're at 7 weeks now since October 7th, there's been this unrelenting attack on Gazan civilians. It has been unrelenting. It has been one bomb after another. As somebody pointed out, it is the largest number of bombs in such a short amount of time, far more than what has happened in Ukraine in relative periods, far more civilians, far more children are being killed. It is horrible. And so it makes it easy to forget. But I implore everyone, do not forget what happened on October 7th, because you're not going to be able to talk to any Israelis, including those who are anti-Zionist, including those who are on the left. You can't talk to any of them after that if you don't keep in mind what happened that day and recognize that people were really angry. So yes, you can talk about Israel's behavior and call it Netanyahu's war. There's a sense in which that's true, but at least at the beginning, there was almost universal agreement that you shoot back after what Hamas did. That stretched across Israeli society, and it's something that we as Americans, those of us who were here in the United States in 2001, should very well remember. I know I do. I remember what that was like. I remember what it meant that 2 days after September 11th, I organized a peace rally. Nobody was very interested in hearing from us. Nonetheless, we did it and we stood there and we got some support. And there were those in Israel that said the same thing as well from the very beginning, including people who lost family members on October 7th. So that all needs to be kept in mind. Okay, the issue of how to move forward is the central issue. That is what we must always be looking at. And we can get stuck in the past and we can get stuck in revenge, or we can try and move forward.
Right.
And I think this idea, the confederation that Joseph is proposing, again, not perfect, but very much an idea that we can move forward with. And that's why I supported it. And, you know, I came here ready to punch holes in it if holes needed to be punched. And I went through all the stuff before I came here in order to do that. All the material on the website, and read over the Constitution. And I have some questions and I have some issues, but on the whole, it's a good plan. You know, and I think, you know, that's, yeah, so I'll stop
Mitchel,
there.
can you take only new callers? Can you take some more?
I could take like 2 more.
Okay, so let's go to Shlomo and then to Todd and Shlomo, go ahead. Shlomo Or.
Yes, very briefly. Number one, about the veto. So I was struggling with the veto problem all along, and I eventually agree that we have no choice, because if we don't have the veto option, then think about it. Then people like Bennett and which is the government of Israel, more or less, they will come to us and say we are undermining the state of Israel and so on and so on. So we don't undermine anything, and we are just a political power, and that's it. Okay, number one. Number two, about the two-state solution. Sorry. In Democracy Now!, there was a very interesting interview with Omer Bartov, a professor at the Brown University, an Israeli like me, about my age also, who is an expert on genocide and the Holocaust, and the question whether what happened in Gaza is genocide or not. I think most experts really agree that it is. He doesn't say exactly, but it's pretty implied. And then the last, but he proposed a two-state solution in a way which is very interesting, because what he said, what about having a border and have 2 states, and all the Palestinians who live in Israel are residents, and those Israelis who live in the West Bank, they are residents there. They have a voting right only in Israel, and the Palestinians have voting rights only in Palestine. And in that case, they can move. There was freedom of movement. The residents will be like a green card people in America. And so that will be like something in between 1 state and 2 states that makes sense, because you don't have to move 800,000 settlers, etc., etc. So just to, and I will put the links in the chat. Number 3, how would you define the question? Before that, quickly, you're right. What happened on October 7 was a huge crime. I agree. But you have to remember also that at least, I don't know, pretty much many of those who died in the hands of the IDF, because they bombed, they came too late, and by the time they came, they did all kinds. So what do you think about this, and what do you think about what happened in Gaza? Would you define it, agree that this is a genocide, actually?
So I'd say a couple. First of all, the question of the IDF, that is iffy at this point. We know the IDF arrived later. We know they actually, not just the helicopters that came and fired at the Hamas infiltrators. And we know they have admitted that they hit some Israelis. We don't know the extent to which that damage was done there and the damage was done by Hamas. That is still unclear. Hamas has not claimed either that the majority of those killed were killed by the IDF. So, you know, I would not overstate. Again, there's a lot still to be found out about exactly what happened on October 7th. But I would not overstate the number of casualties that the IDF might have caused among Israelis. Now the question of genocide, I mean, there is a legal question. So Omer Bartov is among a number of genocide experts who say this is basically say this is a budding genocide. That's what Israel is doing to Gaza is a budding genocide. And it's remarkable. Most of the people who are saying this are Jewish. A number of them, like Omer, are Israeli. Raz Segal, another Jewish Israeli, said this is a textbook case of genocide. And here's the thing: the quibbling among the actual experts, which is then being taken by bad faith actors and saying, see, they're saying it's not genocide. They're not saying it's not genocide. They're saying this is where, you don't say it's genocide till it's over. Once you know it's genocide, it's because all of these things have already been done. They've already been accomplished. What people like Omer are saying is that this is what genocide looks like when you're doing it. It isn't there yet because you're still building it. But he has been very clear that the conditions for genocide, which are usually very difficult to prove, have been established here. There's a legal definition that lists 5 things, any one of which, if you do them with the intent, and this is the wording of the law, with the intent to destroy in part or whole a people as a people, in other words, a people as such is the word they use, that's what we mean by genocide. Which is also, by the way, just to say, why some people have also argued that Hamas's attack was genocidal. I don't agree with that argument any more than you do, Shlomo, but there is a way you can at least logically make that argument because of the technical definition of genocide. Now, what's usually difficult to prove in genocide is intent. That is a key condition of genocide. You have to intend for the people those people to be destroyed as a people. And unusually, Israeli leaders have said that's exactly what they're doing. They have made numerous genocidal statements. Isaac Herzog saying, for example, there's no civilians in Gaza. We had, of course, Yoav Gallant saying these are subhuman animals and they will be treated as such. We had I forget the spokesperson of the IDF saying we're going for maximum damage, not precision. I mean, these are genocidal statements. That's what they are. So
Bibi Netanyahu said Amalek, right?
And well, yes, although Amalek is something that has been brought up many times over the years, right? I've heard this so many times, and that's why, I don't know, maybe to me it was a little less impactful than it was to some people. Amalek, for those of you who don't know, is from the Bible. It's the story. There were people that attacked the nation of Israel from behind on the desert, and God commanded the people of Israel. This is the biblical people of Israel, not the state of Israel now. It's 2 very separate things. Commanded them that you wipe out not only the nation, but also the women, the children, the animals, the slaves. Every trace of them is to be erased. So Amalek is a unique sort of call. When you compare a nation to Amalek, you are definitely talking about, completely wiping them out, but it's also a bombastic term that's been used many, many times. So yes, that is also genocidal language. There's no question about it by definition. So the conditions that are usually difficult to satisfy for genocide are actually satisfied in this case. And I think that you can look at the IDF's tactics and you can see that that's exactly what they're going for, because they have not been pursuing, for the most of this time, they've not been pursuing Hamas. They've been targeting civilians. They've been intentionally targeting places that they told civilians to go to, including the roads that they told them to go south on. They told them go run south, and they bombed those roads and shot at the people on those roads. They bombed the Rafah crossing, which theoretically they wanted people to actually go out of Gaza and into Egypt. They have bombed, mosques, schools, hospitals, the whole thing, and every time, there's a Hamas command center, but there's no command center. We see these obviously staged videos. I mean, it's really quite a thing. So yes, the case for genocide is unusually strong here, but hopefully, if it stops now, it's not genocide yet, and then hopefully it can be averted. Right now, we're in a ceasefire, and as more Orthodox Jews than me, although my background is Orthodox, but as more Orthodox Jews than me say, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, if it be God's will, or there will be a continued ceasefire, and again, less people will die. And we can find a way to stop it here, and then it's not genocide. So today, if we want to say it's not genocide yet, you can make that argument, which is more or less the argument that Omer Bartov is making, that it's like it's on the road, but it's not there yet. To my mind, that's a distinction without a difference. But
one more person, and that's Todd Pierce, and then we'll let you go.
Okay,
Todd.
So I'm a retired U.S. Army JAG officer, but also with a background in psychological operations. Used to be a neoconservative, as they've been called, but moved away from that after my experience in the first Gulf War, where I was at, and began having my eyes open more to what was really going on in the Mideast. I posted a number of chapters in various books. I don't know if they go through, if you can see that in the chat. But my experience on 9/11 was as an active duty JAG officer, and seeing this radical change, transformation take place within my fellow officers and within my fellow citizens, where they wanted revenge. That's what became the overriding concern, 9/11 the United States, and it empowered our own pre-existing right-wing militarists. But the conditioning of war itself takes people in a radical right-wing direction. I would argue, and I think we can see that in the United States. Trump would have been unthinkable back in 2001, even 2010. But we've been so conditioned so that when he came along and appealed to the American people that he would restore torture as U.S. policy, that got him votes. But it should have gotten revulsion. And you can see the same process in Israel ever since 1948. Conflict, war breeds, number one, breeds resistance, but it also breeds fascist thinking.
Yes.
And we're seeing that in the world today. Now, I support this project here because it has the potential to change people's consciousness. I posted a number of things in here on political grammar of feelings, being concerned, which helps explain. So as a JAG officer and Guantanamo defense attorney, I set out trying to understand the phenomenon of terrorism and the phenomenon of fascist repression, because both were at work. I saw that in Guantanamo in appearing in front of the court. Well, it's not a court, it's a military commission, which is not a court. But I also visited Israel last March and was able to go in and see a military court hearing of a 16-year-old Palestinian juvenile for throwing rocks, and got a briefing from people involved with that on how it's a process basically of torture, of intimidation to pull somebody in, push them under such pressure that you're hoping for both of them to turn, to be flipped, to become an informer, but also to intimidate, to terrorize other Palestinians by the fact that they can be just pulled off the street, pulled out of their bedroom or whatever, tossed in a prison and held there until the Israeli Defense Force and the Mossad and whoever else, Shin Bet, whatever, gets what they want. Here's my point. We cannot forget, we're not talking about equal status in this war. All these things, military occupation is an act of war, same as blockade, sanctions, they're all equivalent as acts of war. And so we have a dominating power waging war against the Palestinian people by keeping them in military occupation, keeping them in a state of being subject to military aggression. So as much as this project can be helpful to raise consciousness, and consciousness is something that I really understood better having studied at the New School for an MA in politics, where I studied Edmund Husserl, and then can immediately recognize when Israel talks about cognitive warfare, they're talking about mass change of consciousness to move people in a fascist direction, in a direction that will support them. The chapters I put in the chat, I hope people might take a look at them, makes that very clear. And so you have the attack. And the United States doesn't hesitate to call information war as actual war, economic war, sanctions, blockades, actual war. We need to understand that even those periods of time between attacks on Gaza, Israel is still waging war against Gaza. and the West Bank, all these things, keeping them under economic warfare, information warfare, cognitive warfare, all these things are acts of war. So whatever, however much Hamas should be denounced for October 7th, it also has to be kept in perspective that if you keep people in that kind of status of captivity, they're going to rebel. And sometimes they will go beyond what they should. Think of the Warsaw Ghetto.
We need more people like you. Excuse
So
me, excuse my rudeness. We need more
That's not
people like the gentleman who has just spoken. Well done, well said.
So I think one of the points that I've been looking at lately is, is exactly the one you just raised. One principle is colonized people inevitably revolt, and that is what we are dealing with here, right? We are dealing with a settler colonial state that has dispossessed people, and unlike many of the other conditions that we see about that around the world, that the status of Palestinians as refugees, as being dispossessed and being denied their own rights on their own land, persists today. A lot of those colonial issues, they still we have the post-colonial problems that so many people have, that so many countries deal with, but we're not that post-colonial in Israel Palestine. We're still a colonial, and that is, I completely agree with you. As I mentioned, when Guterres said that this did not happen in a vacuum, that's exactly what I was referring. What you just said is exactly what I'm referring to. We have this for decades and decades, and you're right. The colonized people will eventually fight back. They may well go too far, which Hamas, in my view, did. But that's what happens. I'm looking recently at an incident in the 17th century that happened here in near where I am right now in Virginia, which they called it it was led by a Native American chief named Powhatan, and there were years and years of dispute, and eventually there was an attack on the settlers' village that killed many women, many children. It was something like 350 people were killed, which, when you think about the comparative numbers of and the ability, the abilities of modern warfare versus what you had back then, that was quite a bit. And it was, oh my God, the atrocities, look at what barbarians these Indians are, and all of this. It's exactly the same response that we see with Hamas. It's very much the same condition, and it absolutely needs to be addressed. You mentioned torture, which I think is a really interesting, particularly when it comes to Israel's story, because for years there were fights in the Israeli courts over the use of torture. And it eventually got there's an organization in Israel, the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, and the organization I work for, B'Tselem, won court cases that actually outlawed torture. And then that got reversed years later, as after the Second Intifada and things started going downhill. Similarly, you had the idea of home demolitions, right? We know that Palestinians' homes are routinely demolished by Israel, usually for lack of permits or whatever. But there's another category, which is whenever someone launches an attack against Israelis, whether there's fatalities and injuries or not, very often Israel will demolish the home of the person who launched that attack, and that person's family may be as many as 24 people that are just made homeless because of what one relative did. And that was also at one time ruled illegal in Israel. And again, that was not illegal, but it was a policy that was abandoned because the military actually looked at it and said, well, this doesn't deter terrorism. It's a word I don't usually like to use. But that was what the ruling was. And when they said, since it's not a deterrent, we're not going to do it anymore, which actually was good. It made sense. Do more of that. Think more in that direction. Stop doing these things that enrage people, traumatize people, and turn them into people who have no hope for their own lives and only want to use their lives to take take their oppressors with them. So there was a bit of logic there. Well, that policy got reversed again too. So now we have tons of punitive. Now it's even more routine than it used to be. But what does that show? That shows that in Israel, as in the United States, as in Europe, that we've seen over many, many years, there are people who see the reality. There are people who see what can be done, that it can be better. that there's a reasonable, logical path forward that requires respect for others. It requires not, taking vengeance on every single act that has happened historically. At the same time, also requiring accountability for some of those crimes, and being reasonable about all of this. And recognize that there's a way forward. There are many people in Israel who understand that Palestinians have been displaced. Look at Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, not exactly what you call a dove. He was a defense minister under Netanyahu, for God's sake. So, not exactly a dove. They asked him, what do you think it would have been with you if you had been born a Palestinian? He said, I'm pretty sure I would have strapped a suicide bomb on my back and gone out and tried to kill some people. That was Barak saying that. It's not like Israelis can't see what's going on. For most Israelis, they don't really see an alternative. They don't think an alternative is possible. Part of that is because, the only Palestinians they see are either, really poor workers occasionally, or people coming, trying to take some vengeance. And, same thing, by the way, on the Palestinian side. Almost 20 years ago, when the idea of the separation barrier first came up, I was dead opposed to it. At the time, I worked for Jewish Voice for Peace, and I couldn't convince people around us that this is a terrible, terrible idea. Everyone said, well, look, Israel can do it, and it'll, if they just do it on the border of the West Bank, it's up to them, and this and that. And I said, that's not even the point. First of all, it turned out that's not what they did. They built it inside the West Bank, but I think, that's to me not the important point. The important point to me was that it meant separating Israelis and Palestinians, which kind of it separated Palestinians and Palestinians, but it also meant that Israelis were not going to see Palestinian people, Palestinian families, Palestinian children.
Exactly.
All they saw were violent Palestinians. By the same token, who did the Palestinians see? All they see are if you live in the West Bank, who do you see? You see soldiers and you see settlers. That's all you see.
Yeah.
You don't see the liberal Israelis in Tel Aviv. You don't see the Israelis in groups like Zochrot or groups like B'Tselem or Shalom Achshav or any of the groups that are working to try and resolve these issues. They don't see them. They may see them on the internet, but that's not who they see next door. That's not who they see on the road. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. And again, I'm going to come back to, as I'm going to just close on this because I really do have to go. I'm already late. But this is why I like the idea of a confederation. It forces people together to see each other as human beings. This is the bottom line, because when you see someone as a human being, you can't do what Israel is doing to Gaza. You can't do what Hamas did on October 7th. You just can't do it if you see them as people. Okay, if you only see them as oppressors or as subhumans who are just waiting to kill you, then yes, you can do it. But if you see them as people, you can't. I'm going to leave you with that thought.
All right.
And Joseph, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I have to go too, but I want to say thank you, Mitchell. I agree with virtually everything you just said as well. Betzelem and a couple of other people here, with one person serving as Exhibit A for the opposite side.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Take care now.
Mitchell.
Very much. I got to go too.
Bye-bye.
All right. Samir and Len, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Israel didn't start in 1948. Israel started in 1920. When there was the at the end of World War I and the San Remo groups set up mandates to handle the Arabic areas of the Ottoman Empire until they could be established. There was Palestine, which was the homeland for the Jews. They also set up Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Transjordan. And those were the areas that were set up. And if the Arabs,
the Jews were a minority, a very small minority.
Yeah, yes, they're a very small minority, but they had the Arabs were also a small minority. They had doubled during the period of the
Thank you,
of the mandate, Shlomo. And they did that because the British going against what they agreed upon, had kept out the Jews and brought in the Arabs. The Arabs in the mandate in Palestine were the followers of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a Nazi. He had numbers of pogroms going on from the 1920s to the 40s. But just let me finish. He also
when you're going to finish. We are 3 hours into this. Let's go to Samir.
Okay. Well, give me 5 minutes.
No, I'm not going to give you 5 minutes.
I don't have 5 minutes. I quit.
Listen,
no, I'm not going to give you 5 minutes.
Listen, why? Because they weren't Palestinians. They were Nazis. During World War II, Amin lived in Germany. He set up the Muslim.
Okay, guys, I have to go. This is 3 hours.
Islamic.
Okay, let's have Samir make your concluding remarks, and then we need to move, and then Hani. But real quick, we can't hear you, Samir. We need to put your.
I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Thanks. It's been great.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Samir.
I
cannot hear you. Samir, we cannot hear you.
Something happened to his microphone.
Okay, let's go to Hani and then with Samir. Hani.
I just want to let you know, I
cannot hear you. I hear Hani, but I cannot hear Samir.
Okay, this is Hani. Want to let you know that, there are a lot of good people on both sides. I worked with Israelis in May. I was in Israel and I was in Gaza. Just found out that my house that I just finished last April, next door to my dad, was destroyed by Israeli bombs. Nothing in it. And my cousin, his wife, his daughter, 2 nieces, they were all killed. And I still think that there is room for peace. I really do believe that. There are a lot of good Israelis, there are a lot of good Palestinians. Thank you for your effort.
Thank you. Thank you, Hani. Samir.
Bye.
I cannot hear you, Samir. You need to unmute. Okay. All right. That would conclude for today. I have to leave too. It's been 3 hours.